Hello students, I am Dr. Lalatendu Kesharidas, Assistant Professor of Sociology at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. Welcome to the first week of the NPTEL course, Power and Politics in Contemporary India, a Sociological View. So these are the objectives of today's lecture, and we will be discussing about why study political sociology, defining political sociology, its key characteristics, certain scopes, core questions, methodological debates, and we'll cap it up with the Indian context and sum it up finally. So the basic and first question uh, in any kind of a lecture for any kind of a course is, why do we need to study this? We know what is politics, we know what is sociology, so why do we have to study political sociology as a separate course? So my argument is that politics is not just what we believe in. Politics is not just about what is there in the parliament house, it is not just about the president, the prime minister, the legislatures, or any of the executive board members. Rather, as part of political sociology, we will understand that politics is embedded in society. It is embedded in caste, it is embedded in class, it is embedded in family relationships, it is embedded in ethnic identities, as well as it is embedded in the way we interact with each other in our day-to-day lives. So let us take an example of the elections. In a country like India, where we have democracy, we have elections going on all throughout the year. And when we have elections all throughout the year, a political scientist, in the traditional way they have practiced their discipline, they would look at the different outcomes of politics. Who is voting for whom, why they are voting for whom, and what are the numbers, so on and so forth. But as the political scientist, who also happens to be a sociologist and who is practicing political sociology, would look at why somebody is voting for a particular party, why they are taking a decision. Is the decision based on their individual preferences, or are these decisions based on certain power relationships? For example, I vote for a particular party or a particular candidate because that candidate happens to be from my caste, or that person happens to be the part of my religion, and because I am in these issues, these relationships are coloring my vision, so that's the reason why I am voting for an individual. There is a possibility that I am voting for that person because of my own class position. I belong to a class of people where I want everything to be free. Free in sense, if I want to buy a piece of land, I don't want a lot of tax on that. If I want to establish an industry, I don't want to have a lot of tax on that. I would like the government to give me as much as possible without extracting enough from me. So these are all social relationships. These are all issues related to sociology. But what we do here is that we look at society, we look at the state, and we look at how they are interrelated to each other. What are the points of intersection at which both the society and the state are meeting with each other, and who are identifying, who are defining these meeting points, and what power relationships are characterized by it. So in a sense, political sociology bridges the political science and that of sociology. Now coming to the next aspect, we have understood why political sociology. So let us discuss and go about looking at what is political sociology in the first case. So there is no consensus, like in any social science discipline, there is no consensus as to what is political sociology. But many scholars have come up over the past 50-60 years who have been speaking about political sociology, who are practicing political sociology, and one of them being that of Tom Bottomore. In his 1979 classic text, Political Sociology, he argues that political sociology is the study of power in its social context. Now, when you look at social context, now we can say that it is about individual or a collective group and their abilities to do some the work. Now, when we say about an individual or a collective and how they are able to do certain work, we have to look at it from not just from the ability itself, because ability is also influenced by your position and your power. So, these abilities could again be characterized in terms of decisions, in terms of setting agenda, as well as in terms of whether they are able to implement this agenda or not. So, when you talk about now political sociology as study of power in its social context, we have to keep in mind all these aspects of it. Without this, political sociology is incomplete. Now, it is also about looking at institutions, both in their formal sense as well as in their informal sense. Now, there is another scholar by the name Graham Taylor who is also talking about political sociology, and he identifies political sociology in terms of power, in terms of ideology, and in terms of identity. So, what does this mean? It means that Graham Taylor is talking about who defines power, who controls the way power functions and somebody is acting. Now, we can relate this power with Bottomore's idea of abilities. So, we can also relate and speak about ideology. So, is your ideology pertaining to the liberalism? Is your ideology pertaining to the right wing, which can also be called as conservative, or is it related to the left, who speaks about the marginalized? So, ideology is also about what are the different kind of groups whose ideas are getting formed, and this formation could be because of your class, because of your caste, so on and so forth. And this ideology and power are again related to your own positionality in society, your positionality in terms of class, your positionality in terms of caste, your positionality in terms of gender, and your positionality because you belong to a particular ethnic group. And when we bring the agency aspect of Tom Bottomore and the power, ideology and identity aspects of Graham Taylor, then we can say that we understand political sociology and how political sociology and how power works in the social context, because power here, power, ideology and identity, they all function at the level of society. Even when we are talking about power in terms of politics, that is also about society and social relationships. And these social relations characterize your positions in politics. So, all of them in a sense are interlinked, and these interlinkages are what characterize political sociology. Now, when we are talking about characterizations, so let us go for its key characteristics. Now, when you are talking about key characteristics, the first one is interdisciplinary. Now, why I am saying it is interdisciplinary? Primarily because as I have been saying since some time, that we have political science, we have sociology, we have anthropology, we have history, as well as we have political economy. Now, when all of them are coming together for our understanding of society, that means it is truly interdisciplinary. With political science, we understand the nature of politics at an institutional level. In terms of sociology, we understand what are the social institutions, whether it is family, whether it is the caste as an institution, it is class as an institution, or it is something else. In anthropology, we immerse ourselves with deep ethnographic methods, which we will discuss in a little while, to understand the intricacies of how social groups are functioning at the most macro level. It could be a family, it could be a household, it could be even a small hamlet or a village. So, or it could also be at the level of a city. And history tells us why we need to know our past, because when we know our past, that means we can understand our present as well as we can understand our future. And political economy, which is characterization of politics and economy, is the closest to the political sociology. Because like political sociology, political economy also brings politics and the social aspects together. The next is that of it is the next characteristic is criticality. Now, as I said, when you are using an interdisciplinary method, that means you are going to ask certain questions that are typically or traditionally not being raised within the disciplinary boundaries, and criticality is one of the key aspects of it. So, when we are talking about criticality, it is also about not taking politics at the face value. So, what is the meaning of face value? Face value means that what you see is what you believe, but political sociology tells us that our eyes can deceive us. What we see is not always the truth. So, as the seeker of truth, we have to ask critical questions. A critical question could be that, for example, a policy has been implemented and this policy, the question could be for whom it is there and who is bringing it and who is going to benefit out of it. But at the same time, there is the fourth category, and this fourth category is about the ones who are losing out. And political sociology is not biased either towards the one who is losing out or towards the ones who for whom something is being done. So, critical questions mark the foundation on which, alongside interdisciplinarity, criticality is what is the foundation of this course. The third aspect is that of dynamic. It is dynamic primarily because it is adjusting itself to the way society is evolving. For example, till 1950s, we were talking about modernization. From, from 1950s to the 2000s, we are talking about identity, or maybe we can say from 1960 or 60s onwards, with the uh, with the students movements, with the Vietnam War, as well as with enormous number of atomic tests throughout the world. So, identity in terms of ecological identity, in terms of feminist identity, in terms of racial identity, they became quite significant. But in the contemporary period, the 21st century, what we see is about mass media. Let us suppose about Facebook and how each one of them is impacting our lives and why they are impacting us. So, with these key characteristics, we understand the background of political sociology. Now, let us move on to the next phase, in which we will be talking about its scopes. So, in terms of scope, we have three scopes: first, institution; second, power; and third, resistance. Let me discuss each one of them at one go. Now, I have been speaking about institutions, political scientists have been speaking about institutions, and all of us have been speaking about institutions. And in our day to day life, we use this term without even thinking twice. But in social sciences, particularly in sociology, anthropology, as well as the political science, we look at institutions in terms of their endurance. So, these institutions are not affected by individual actions. So, to give an example of family, our families have been here irrespective of the members who are coming into it by taking birth or by marriages, or the ones who are dying out. Family remains. One individual family might die out, but that does not eliminate the idea of family itself. Even when we have single not unmarried couples living together, it is also a part of family. It is just that in certain societies they have not been formalized, and in certain other societies they have been formalized. So, institutions outlive an individual. That is the reason why we have political institutions like the state, legislatures, bureaucracies, and political parties. But at the same time, we also have civil institutions in terms of civil society organizations. So, both of them bring together and constitute what we call institutions. Now, let me start with the example of, we will discuss the institutions by looking at these three examples: Weber's bureaucracy, Panchayati Raj in India, as well as civil society institutes, organizations. So, Max Weber, he was a German sociologist who lived in the late 19th and early 20th century, and this week itself we are going to discuss about Weber and his ideas on power. So, I will not spend much time on him. So, Weber defined bureaucracy in terms of rational legal authority. Now, what does the rational legal authority means? It basically means that bureaucracy functions in terms of rules, in terms of regulations, in terms of efficiency, as well as in terms of its impersonality. So, any bureaucrat whom you have met in your village, whom you have met to get a certificate in your institutions, in your colleges, or anywhere for that matter, there is a possibility that you do not know everybody in that organization by person. There is a possibility that the other person also does not know you. So, bureaucracy again is not just about an IAS officer or IPS officer. Bureaucracy encompasses any institution which is selected through a rational legal procedure. Now, there is a possibility that you are watching this lecture primarily because you are interested in the competing for civil services and you would like to become an IAS officer. Do you think an office of IAS officer constitutes of only the IAS officer, or are there other people who are also working there? And just imagine how each one of these IAS officer gets selected. Do you think they are there because they know some individuals, because they are born to be IAS officer? The answer is no. Even if it is a family legacy, but it is not hereditary, which essentially means that even if the father or your mother or your other relatives are IAS officers or were IAS officers, it does not guarantee you a position of being an IAS. So, this is quite different from the way it used to work in a traditional society, in which because you were born to a particular caste, because you were born to a particular family, so you are duty bound as well as you are bound by your birthright to gain that position. Think about Queen Elizabeth of England. Think about King Charles of England. Do you think they were elected or they wrote certain examination in order to sit there? The answer could not be further from truth. But people who are part of their bureaucracy, people who are running even their own household, they are selected through a rigorous process. Anybody who is part of it has to go through that rigorous process, and this is why for Weber these institutions are enduring. The second now could be that of Panchayati Raj. Now, Panchayati Raj is again a very interesting case, primarily because with the constitutional amendments, we have a more formal structure now, in which periodically there are elections in which people get elected to certain positions for district panchayat, positions for other levels of panchayats. And when they get elected, the real work starts. Now, just imagine there is a constituency, or there is a village panchayat or gram panchayat, and because of rotation, one gram panchayat has now been converted to a woman only panchayat, which means that only a woman who is residing in that panchayat can contest for a particular position, maybe for sarpanch, maybe for the members of the council. But the woman does not know anything. There is a possibility that the woman knows a lot of things, but before him or before her, we had her husband who was a male relative who was a part of this structure, and they do not want to let go of the privileges that comes with being part of this institution. So, we have this phenomena as a part of informal informal institution building, that even if the woman has become a panchayat member or sarpanch, the male relatives are the real collars of power. In other words, we have the phenomena of sarpanchpatis or panchpatis. The Panchayat series on Amazon Prime, many of you might have already gone through all the discussion that has happening. It shows in a way how this is being framed. how the man is taking a call even though his wife happens to be sarpanch. The same thing can happen in other places also. Now coming to our third example of civil society, all of us are aware about something called Right to Information Act. But are you aware that the Right to Information Act came into existence not because somebody in power wanted to give it to the people or the citizens of this country, rather it happened because of civil society movements, which started in Rajasthan, by the way, and it was started by an organization by the name of Kisan Mazdoor Shakti Sangathan, which used its mobilization capability to bring to the entire nation's attention why it is so important to have these powers. Now let us move to the second scope, which is power. Now, as I have been saying about Marx as well as Weber and others, so power is the second and one of the crucial dimensions of the political sociology. Now, primarily when we understand political sociology, these four come into picture. So, in the subsequent classes, we will discuss many more, but for today's introductory lecture, we are going to discuss these four and how they have understood power in a very brief note. So, for Karl Marx, power is rooted in class and economy. For Weber, power exists in all relationships. For Gramsci, it is about hegemony, consent through ideas. For Foucault, power is diffusive, productive, so on and so forth. Now, when Marx speaks about the power residing in class and economy, that means it is not just economy, rather your position in that economy, whether you are the owners of means of production and factors of production, or you are just consumers, or you have the ownership of only your physical the labor. Weber, who came after Marx, argues that power is not just concentrated in the economic relationships, because you have bureaucracy, and anybody who is part of this bureaucracy may or may not have the class position as Marx would argue about. You are part of religion, so of a particular religion, so you have a different aspect of looking at it. So he gave three distinct ways. One is that of class, which is associated with market. You have status, which is associated with your social position, and you have party, your affiliation to a political institution. Now, while for Marx class was important, for Weber these two are also very significant. So, in the subsequent classes we will go into details how Weber is bringing all these three in order to understand something. Now, the next person is Gramsci. So, Gramsci was a Italian Marxist activist as well as author, who gave this very significant concept called hegemony. Now, when I say consent through ideas, so hegemony is not just consent. Hegemony is consent plus coercion. So, you have a danda at in one hand, and you have a chocolate in your other hand. That is how our parents used to treat us when we were kids. If you do not listen to them, if you do not follow what they are saying, they knew that they could slap you, and we also knew that they could slap us. But even when we are getting a slap, we always knew that after the slap we might get some sweets, we might get some chocolates. So, at a more rudimentary way, the position, that is how hegemony can be understood. The next is that of Foucault's power, because Foucault, when he's talking about power, it is more about power which is not just based in institutions but also at the level of groundedness, how interpersonal relationships are defined through different ways of the power. How much knowledge do you have, and whether this knowledge is defining your power position in the society. So, third aspect is that of resistance, in which any power position, any institutional setting is not without resistance, because any power position will always generate counter movements. Take for example Chipko movement. Why did Chipko movement happen in the first place? It happened because of corporate takeover of the forest. It happened because of because the state was favoring the corporate takeover, and it was not listening to the local people, and women and other organizations came together in order to resist this power. Same was the Dalit Panther, same is that of farmers movements. But while these were the most upfront and argumentatively the more violent and straightforward movements, we also have hidden acts or subtle forms of everyday resistance. We will discuss about this in subsequent classes, but suffice it to say that even if somebody is asking you to do something, you do not want to do it, so the delay in the process of your action can also be part of the subtle movements, these hidden acts. As well as identity based resistances in the contemporary era, in which we see the LGBTQ movement, the activists as well as followers moving around because they want their voices to be heard. Certain other groups, they want their voices to be heard. Environmentalists want their voices to be heard. So, this way what we can identify is that the scope of political society can be drawn as part of this triad of power, institutions and resistance. So, there is resistance towards institution, there is resistance towards powers, and any time the power and institutions they come together, there will always be resistance towards it. And this is the classic way through which political sociology wants to understand society. Now that we have gone through the scopes, let us check out what are the core questions. So, we do not have a lot of questions here, primarily because we need to speak about core questions, it is about what defines the subject. Political sociology is defined by who rules, how do they rule, and in whose interests, and is politics about stability or conflict. Now, this is something that we have been discussing since some time, so I will not get into the details of it, but to say that who rules, it is about who are these institutions, individuals, communities, people who are from a particular caste, people from a particular class, or people from a particular gender who are ruling. And how are they ruling? Are they ruling through authoritative means or through democratic means? Even if it is a democracy, who are the rulers there? Are these rulers again about people who have always been in powerful positions or something else? So, that brings me to in whose interests, because this is one of the significant aspects, and this is where the social aspect comes, in which the interests of different classes, different groups, different castes are not the same. But as we discussed before, hegemony is something that builds up these interests, that even if there are people who are from different social groups, they are still able to identify with a common issue and they would like to work it out. the politics is about stability or it's about conflict. This is a classic example of sociology as well as political science, because certain scholars have been asking about whether society functions in terms of stability, that everybody is living together happily ever and after, or every relationship is conflictual in terms of caste conflicts, in terms of class conflicts, in terms of gender conflicts, so on and so forth. Now we are almost towards the fag end of today's lecture. So let us now go briefly with the methodological debates that are there. One of the first debates is about natural science or interpretive models. Are we going to follow the models that have been given by natural science? In terms of what we observe is what we discuss. If we do not observe something, then we do not discuss about it, or it is not physically possible or intellectually possible to move about it, or we are going to interpret what we are observing and what we cannot observe. So, both sociology as well as anthropology are very good at looking at the hidden transcripts, or something that we call as between the lines, what is happening here, or what is happening in the dark corners of a society. So, this way the interpretive models or natural science models are quite crucial here, whether it is positivism or it is again interpretivism are also significant. So, these two can be clubbed together, because positivism always wanted to follow the methods of natural science, whereas this one always wanted to follow the methods that were given by Max Weber. Whether it is through empiricism by collecting data in terms of surveys, in terms of numbers, as well as field work, or through structuralism by looking at the structures of a society. So, the what structures constitute this field. So, if this is a graph, it is a part of a particular structure, and are we going to look at this portion, this portion, this portion, or this portion, and our own ideas of how we are going to collect data will determine what we are interpreting rather than the other way around. In the case of India, we have seen that political sociologists have used interdisciplinary methods in order to understand what is happening. They have used survey methods, ethnographies, as well as history in order to bring out nuances of what is happening in society. Now, to finally recap what we have been discussing here is that political sociology looks at power, it looks at institutions, it looks at resistance, and it looks at all these things at the level of society, at the level of state, as well as at the level at which they are all intersecting with each other. So, these are a few suggested questions that you can go through while we meet for the next lecture. Thank you very much.